"Pack your things and be out by 5, David Chen said, leaning back in his ergonomic chair like he owned the world. Which, according to the paperwork scattered across his mahogany desk, he technically did. "We appreciate everything you've done. For StreamlineCore, Sarah. But now that TaskFlow Pro is generating $200 million in annual revenue, we're restructuring the development team." I sat there in his corner office, 35 floors above Austin's skyline, watching the afternoon sun glint off Lady Bird Lake through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 years ago, this company existed only as David's half-baked idea scribbled on a napkin at the Grind coffee shop. Now, StreamlineCore Technologies occupied an entire floor of Austin's most prestigious tech tower, and my app was making them richer than they'd ever dreamed possible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Restructuring, I repeated, keeping my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. After TaskFlow Pro just signed Microsoft, Amazon, and Tesla as enterprise clients, David's smile was the kind that made my skin crawl, all teeth and no warmth. That's exactly why we need fresh leadership in the development department. Marcus Thompson will be taking over as head of product development. His vision for scaling enterprise solutions is exactly what we need moving forward. Marcus Thompson, the marketing guy who couldn't code his way out of a paper bag, but somehow convinced David he understood software architecture because he'd read a few tech blogs. The same Marcus who'd been taking credit for my innovations in every board meeting for the past 6 months, standing up there with his perfectly styled hair and expensive suits, explaining his revolutionary approach to AI-powered task management. What David didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't just TaskFlow Pro's lead developer. I was its creator, its architect, its digital DNA. Every line of code, every algorithm, every breakthrough that made this app worth $200 million had flowed through my fingers during countless 18-hour days and sleepless nights. And buried deep within that code, invisible to anyone who hadn't written it themselves, was something I'd started calling my insurance policy. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and if you'd told me 3 years ago that I'd be sitting in a CEO's office, getting fired from the company I'd built from the ground up, I would have laughed. Back then, I was just another 25-year-old software engineer with a computer science degree from UT Austin, and dreams bigger than my studio apartment in East Austin. I'd been coding since I was 12, building apps and websites throughout high school and college, always knowing that somewhere in the endless possibilities of ones and zeros, I'd find my breakthrough. That breakthrough came during my senior year when I started noticing a pattern. Everyone around me, from fellow students to professors to working professionals, struggled with the same fundamental problem. They had too many tasks, too many platforms, too many disconnected tools trying to manage their productivity. Email here, project management there, calendars somewhere else, and none of it talking to each other in any meaningful way. I spent my entire final semester building what would eventually become TaskFlow Pro. Not the simplified version that launched 3 years later, but the raw, powerful core that could learn user behavior, predict workflow patterns, and optimize productivity in ways that seemed almost magical. I called it my digital assistant with a PhD in human psychology. The code was elegant, complex, and completely original. I developed proprietary algorithms for natural language processing, behavioral pattern recognition, and predictive task prioritization that were years ahead of anything else in the market. But more importantly, I'd solved the integration problem that had stumped every other productivity app. TaskFlow Pro could seamlessly connect with any existing software, learn from it, and optimize workflows across platforms without requiring users to abandon their familiar tools. After graduation, I spent 6 months living off ramen noodles and coffee, sleeping on my friend Rachel's couch, pouring every waking hour into perfecting the app. I knew I had something special, but I also knew I needed business expertise and funding to turn it into a real company. That's when I met David Chen at a tech meetup downtown. David was everything I wasn't. Confident, connected, with an MBA from Wharton, and a track record of successful startups under his belt. He had the business acumen, the network, and most importantly, the ability to raise capital. When I showed him TaskFlow Pro, his eyes lit up like he'd discovered buried treasure. "This is revolutionary," he'd said, pacing around his temporary office space in a co-working building. "Sarah, this could be the next billion-dollar productivity platform. But we need to move fast. The market window for something like this won't stay open forever." I was naive enough to believe that partnership meant equality. David promised me 20% equity, the title of Chief Technology Officer, and complete creative control over the technical development. In return, he'd handle everything else: fundraising, business development, marketing, sales, and all the corporate machinery I had no interest in managing. The first year was intoxicating. We raised $2 million in seed funding, hired a small team of talented developers, and launched TaskFlow Pro to immediate acclaim. TechCrunch called it the productivity app that finally gets it right. Wired featured it as one of the year's most innovative software solutions. Within 6 months, we had 50,000 paying subscribers and growing exponentially. But success has a way of changing people, or maybe revealing who they really were all along. By the second year, David had started making unilateral decisions about the app's direction. Features I'd designed were being modified or removed entirely. Worse, in investor meetings and press interviews, my role was gradually diminishing. David began referring to TaskFlow Pro as his vision and his innovation. When reporters asked about the technical development, he'd give vague answers about our amazing development team without mentioning my name. The breaking point came during year 3 when we landed our first major enterprise client, a Fortune 500 consulting firm that paid us $500,000 for a customized version of TaskFlow Pro. I'd worked for 3 months straight, practically living in the office, to build the specific features they needed. When David announced the deal at our company all-hands meeting, he credited the innovative thinking of our product development team led by Marcus Thompson. Marcus Thompson, who'd joined the company 6 months earlier as head of marketing and somehow convinced David he understood software development. Marcus, who'd never written a line of code in his life, but spoke fluently in buzzwords and business jargon that impressed investors. Marcus, who'd started inserting himself into technical discussions and presenting my ideas as collaborative efforts he'd helped conceptualize. I should have seen the writing on the wall, but I was too focused on the work to pay attention to the politics. While David and Marcus were playing corporate chess, I was building the features that would make TaskFlow Pro irresistible to enterprise clients. The AI-powered workflow optimization that could increase team productivity by 40%. The predictive analytics that could identify bottlenecks before they caused delays. The seamless integration capabilities that worked with over 300 existing business software platforms. These weren't incremental improvements. They were breakthrough innovations that transformed TaskFlow Pro from a useful productivity tool into an essential business platform. And every single one of them came from algorithms I'd developed, problems I'd solved, and code I'd written. The enterprise clients started flooding in. Microsoft signed a 2-year contract worth $30 million. Amazon committed to rolling out TaskFlow Pro across their entire logistics division for $50 million. Tesla wanted us to customize the platform for their manufacturing workflows, another $40 million deal. Within 18 months, we'd gone from a promising startup to a company generating $200 million in annual recurring revenue. That's when David called me into his office for our final conversation as colleagues. "The thing is, Sarah," he continued, straightening his tie as if he were about to deliver a presentation to investors, "TaskFlow Pro has evolved beyond what any single developer can manage. We need someone with enterprise experience, someone who understands how to scale technical operations for Fortune 500 clients. Someone like Marcus, I said, not really asking. Marcus has been instrumental in our enterprise success, David replied smoothly. His vision for B2B integration has been the driving force behind our recent growth. It makes sense for him to take full ownership of the product development process. His vision, his integration, his ownership. The words stung because they were so perfectly crafted to erase my contribution while elevating someone who'd contributed nothing to the technical development of the platform. And my equity? I asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it spoken aloud. David's expression shifted slightly, the fake warmth replaced by cold calculation. Your equity remains unchanged, of course. 20% is 20%. But your role in the company needs to evolve. We're prepared to offer you a generous severance package and a consulting contract for the transition period. Generous. Transition period. Corporate euphemisms for, we're stealing your life's work and paying you to disappear quietly. I looked around his office, taking in the awards and accolades that lined the walls. Austin's Top Tech Innovator. Entrepreneur of the Year. Visionary Leader in Software Development. Every single one of them earned through the success of an app I'd built with my own hands, staying up until 3 a.m. debugging code while preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. David was at networking events taking credit for my innovations. I understand, I said finally, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. When do you want me to start the transition? David seemed taken aback by my composed response. He'd probably expected tears, arguments, or desperate pleas for reconsideration. Well, we were thinking next week would be sufficient for you to document the codebase and brief Marcus on the technical architecture. Next week, 3 years of revolutionary software development, $200 million in revenue, and they wanted me to summarize everything in a week-long transition meeting with someone who couldn't distinguish between Python and JavaScript. That should be plenty of time, I agreed, standing up from my chair. I'll make sure Marcus has everything he needs to maintain the platform. As I walked toward the door, David called after me. Sarah, I want you to know this isn't personal. You're incredibly talented, and I'm sure you'll do amazing things wherever you land next. StreamlineCore will always be proud to have been part of your early career. Part of my early career, as if TaskFlow Pro was some entry-level project I'd worked on between real jobs, instead of the revolutionary platform that had made him rich enough to buy a penthouse condo and a Tesla Model S. I turned back to look at him one last time, sitting behind his expensive desk in his corner office with its panoramic view of Austin's skyline. Don't worry, David. I'm sure TaskFlow Pro will continue to be everything you've envisioned. The emphasis on "you've envisioned" was subtle enough that he didn't catch it, but pointed enough that I felt a small satisfaction in the moment. Because David had never envisioned anything beyond the dollar signs in his eyes when I'd first shown him the app. Every breakthrough, every innovation, every feature that made TaskFlow Pro worth $200 million had come from my imagination, my problem-solving, my relentless pursuit of technical excellence. What David didn't know, what none of them knew, was that buried deep within TaskFlow Pro's source code was something I'd built during those early months when I was still naive, enough to trust that talent and hard work would be rewarded fairly. It wasn't malicious code, nothing that would harm user data or damage the platform's functionality. But it was a failsafe, a digital insurance policy that ensured the app's continued operation required my ongoing involvement. Every 72 hours, TaskFlow Pro's core algorithms performed what appeared to be a routine security check. The system would ping a specific server, verify a unique authentication token, and continue normal operations. To anyone examining the code, it looked like standard cybersecurity protocol, the kind of automated verification that responsible software platforms performed regularly. But that authentication token wasn't generated by some corporate security system. It was biometrically linked to my fingerprint, created during the app's initial development and embedded so deeply within the platform's architecture that removing it would require rebuilding the entire system from scratch. As I packed my personal belongings from my desk later that afternoon, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and anticipation. 3 years of my life were scattered across this workspace. The ergonomic keyboard I'd bought with my first paycheck, the dual monitors I'd configured for optimal coding efficiency, the whiteboard covered in algorithm diagrams that only I fully understood. Rachel Green, my former colleague and one of the few people in the company who knew the true extent of my contributions, appeared beside my desk with a coffee and a concerned expression. "I can't believe they're actually doing this," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Everyone knows TaskFlow Pro is your baby." Rachel had been hired as a junior developer during our second year, and I'd mentored her through some of the platform's most complex technical challenges. She understood the code base well enough to recognize my fingerprints on every major feature, and she'd been in enough meetings to witness the gradual erasure of my contributions from the company narrative. "David's got to do what's best for the company," I replied diplomatically, though the words tasted bitter. "Marcus has big plans for enterprise expansion." "Marcus couldn't debug a Hello World program?" Rachel muttered, then looked at me with genuine curiosity. "You're taking this remarkably well. I expected you to be furious." I smiled, sliding my laptop into its carrying case. "Oh, I am furious. But fury is just wasted energy unless you channel it into something productive." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous," I corrected. "Just patient. Sometimes the best response to betrayal is simply waiting for natural consequences to unfold." That evening, I sat in my East Austin loft apartment, looking out at the city lights, and thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 3 years ago, I'd been a broke college graduate with nothing but a revolutionary idea and the technical skills to make it reality. Now, I was unemployed again, but with 20% ownership in a company worth potentially billions of dollars. And the knowledge that TaskFlow Pro's continued success depended entirely on my ongoing cooperation. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Heard about StreamlineCore. If you're interested in discussing opportunities, let's grab coffee. Jennifer Walsh, CTO at Innovate Tech Solutions." Jennifer Walsh. I knew the name from industry conferences and tech publications. Innovate Tech was one of Austin's most respected software development firms, known for treating their technical talent with the respect and recognition that StreamlineCore had denied me. The text was polite, professional, and timed perfectly to reach me during my most vulnerable moment. But as I stared at the message, I realized I wasn't ready for the next opportunity yet. First, I needed to see how this story ended. David, Marcus, and Emma Rodriguez, the CFO who'd supported my removal, believed they'd successfully eliminated a potential threat to their narrative of entrepreneurial success. They thought they could steal my life's work, erase my contributions, and continue profiting from my innovations without consequence. They were about to learn otherwise. Over the next 2 days, I maintained perfect professionalism during the transition meetings with Marcus. I walked him through the codebase architecture, explained the core algorithms, and provided detailed documentation for the platform's most critical functions. Marcus nodded along, taking notes and asking questions. That revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of how software development actually worked. "So, this section here handles the AI processing?" he asked, pointing to a block of code that managed user interface rendering. "That's actually the front-end display logic," I corrected gently. "The AI algorithms are in the behavioral analysis module, which interfaces with the natural language processing engine through the API gateway." Marcus scribbled something in his notebook, clearly not understanding the distinction, but unwilling to admit his ignorance. "Right, of course. And if we wanted to add new features, we'd just modify these parameters?" The question revealed such a basic misunderstanding of software architecture that I almost felt sorry for him. Adding new features to TaskFlow Pro required understanding the intricate relationships between dozens of interconnected modules, each with its own logic, dependencies, and performance requirements. It wasn't a matter of modifying parameters. It was like performing brain surgery while the patient was running a marathon. It's a bit more complex than that, I explained, pulling up the system architecture diagram I'd created. TaskFlow Pro is built on a microservices architecture with distributed processing across multiple cloud environments. Any significant feature? Additions require careful integration testing to ensure they don't compromise the platform's stability or performance. Marcus nodded sagely, as if he understood every word, but I could see the glazed look in his eyes that meant he was already lost. This was the person David believed could maintain and expand a platform generating $200 million in annual revenue. On my final day, David organized a small farewell gathering in the office kitchen. About 20 employees showed up, most of them looking uncomfortable and avoiding eye contact. They knew what was happening was wrong, but nobody was willing to risk their own job security by speaking up. "We want to thank Sarah for her contributions to TaskFlow Pro's early development," David announced, holding a bottle of champagne that probably cost more than my first month's salary. Her technical skills helped us build the foundation that's enabled our current success. Early development. Foundation. The language was carefully chosen to minimize my role while acknowledging it just enough to avoid looking completely heartless. Emma Rodriguez, the CFO, nodded approvingly from beside David, while Marcus stood nearby with a self-satisfied expression that made my stomach turn. "Sarah's moving on to new challenges," David continued, "and we're excited to see what she accomplishes next. Marcus will be leading our development team into the next phase of growth, building on the solid groundwork that's already in place." Solid groundwork. As if TaskFlow Pro was some half-finished project that Marcus would complete, rather than a revolutionary platform that was already generating more revenue than most companies see in their entire existence. I raised my coffee mug in acknowledgement of the toast, smiled graciously, and said all the appropriate things about being grateful for the opportunity and wishing everyone continued success. Inside, I was counting down the hours until my fail-safe protocol would activate and show them exactly what their solid groundwork was really worth without my continued involvement. 72 hours. That's how long they had to enjoy their victory before discovering that stealing my life's work came with consequences they'd never imagined. The first indication that something was wrong came at exactly 9:47 a.m. on Thursday morning, 3 days after my departure from StreamlineCore. I was sitting in my favorite corner booth at the grind, sipping a vanilla latte and reviewing job postings on my laptop, when my phone started buzzing with notifications. Text messages, missed calls, and emails were flooding in faster than I could read them. The first call I answered was from Rachel, and I could hear the panic in her voice before she even spoke. "Sarah, thank God you picked up. Something's happening with TaskFlow Pro, and nobody knows what to do. The entire platform is running like it's stuck in molasses. Enterprise clients are calling to complain about response times, and Marcus is having a complete meltdown." I took another sip of my latte, savoring both the vanilla flavor and the moment I'd been anticipating for 3 days. What kind of performance issues are they seeing? Everything is taking forever to load. Task synchronization is delayed by hours instead of happening in real time. The AI recommendations are either not working at all or giving completely random suggestions. Microsoft's project managers are furious because their workflow optimization dropped from 40% improvement to basically zero overnight. Through the coffee shop's large windows, I could see downtown Austin's skyline stretching toward the horizon, with StreamlineCore's building prominently visible among the glass towers. Somewhere up on that 35th floor, David and Marcus were probably scrambling to understand why their $200 million platform had suddenly started performing like a broken calculator. "Have they tried restarting the servers?" I asked innocently, knowing full well that server restarts wouldn't resolve an authentication failure embedded deep within the platform's core architecture. "They've restarted everything twice," Rachel replied, her voice getting more frantic. "Marcus keeps insisting it's a hardware problem, but our system administrator says all the servers are running normally. The weird thing is that the platform isn't completely broken. It's just running incredibly slowly and giving weird results." This was exactly how I designed the failsafe to behave. Rather than causing a catastrophic failure that could harm user data or create legal liability, the authentication timeout triggered a gradual degradation of the platform's performance. TaskFlow Pro would continue to function, but without access to the optimized algorithms and processing shortcuts that made it revolutionary, it would perform no better than any basic task management tool available for $20 a month. "Did anyone check the error logs?" I asked, already knowing what they would find. The logs would show routine system operations with no obvious problems, because the authentication failure was designed to look like a minor background process, rather than a critical system component. "Marcus has been staring at error logs for 2 hours, Rachel said. "He keeps muttering about server configurations and database connections. But honestly, Sarah, I don't think he understands what he's looking at. Some of the junior developers have been trying to help, but without understanding the core architecture, we're all just guessing." The irony was delicious. Marcus had spent months convincing David that he could manage TaskFlow Pro's technical development, presenting himself as a visionary leader who understood enterprise software at a strategic level. Now, faced with his first real technical crisis, he was discovering the difference between talking about code and actually understanding how it worked. My phone buzzed with another incoming call. The display showed David Chen, StreamlineCore CEO. I let it go to voicemail and continued my conversation with Rachel. "I'm sure they'll figure it out," I said diplomatically. "Marcus is probably just being thorough in his analysis." "Sarah, between you and me, I think Marcus is in way over his head. Yesterday, he asked me to explain the difference between the API gateway and the database connection pool. Those are fundamental concepts that any competent developer should understand immediately." Rachel's frustration was understandable. She'd worked closely with me for 2 years, helping to build and maintain TaskFlow Pro's complex architecture. She understood the elegant interconnections between different system components and could troubleshoot problems that would stump less experienced developers. Watching Marcus stumble through basic technical concepts while claiming authority over the entire platform must have been incredibly frustrating. "Have you suggested bringing in outside consultants?" I asked, genuinely curious about how far David would go to avoid admitting they'd made a mistake in firing me. Marcus mentioned it, but David shot down the idea immediately. He said hiring external consultants would make the company look incompetent to our enterprise clients. Plus, there's the intellectual property concern. David doesn't want anyone outside the company examining our proprietary algorithms. David's paranoia about intellectual property was understandable, but it also trapped him in a situation he couldn't easily escape. TaskFlow Pro's competitive advantage came from proprietary algorithms that I'd developed, and those algorithms were so intricately woven into the platform's architecture that understanding them required intimate knowledge of my coding approach and problem-solving methodology. Bringing in external consultants might solve the immediate performance problems, but it would also expose the fact that StreamlineCore's technical leadership didn't understand their own product well enough to maintain it without help. For a company trying to position itself as a leader in enterprise software development, that kind of revelation could be devastating to their credibility and valuation. "What's the mood like in the office?" I asked, settling back into my booth to enjoy the unfolding drama. "Tense doesn't begin to cover it," Rachel replied. "Emma Rodriguez has been in meetings with David all morning, and I overheard her mentioning something about client retention concerns. Marcus is trying to project confidence, but you can tell he's panicking. He's been snapping at junior developers and making increasingly desperate suggestions about system fixes that don't make any technical sense. Emma Rodriguez, StreamlineCore's CFO, was probably calculating the financial impact of their current crisis. Enterprise clients paid premium prices for TaskFlow Pro specifically because of its superior performance and AI-powered optimization capabilities. If the platform couldn't deliver those advantages, clients would either demand significant price reductions or switch to competing solutions entirely. With $200 million in annual recurring revenue at stake, every day of degraded performance represented potentially millions in lost value. Emma was smart enough to understand that this wasn't just a temporary technical glitch, but a fundamental threat to the company's entire business model. My phone buzzed again with another call from David. This time I decided to answer, curious to hear how he would approach the conversation. "Sarah, thank God." David's voice was strained, lacking the confident authority he'd displayed during our farewell meeting 3 days earlier. "We're experiencing some technical difficulties with TaskFlow Pro, and I was hoping you might be available for a brief consulting engagement to help us troubleshoot the issues." The transformation in his tone was remarkable. 3 days ago, he'd dismissed me as unnecessary for the platform's continued development. Now he was practically begging for my assistance, though he was trying to frame it as a business transaction, rather than an admission of desperation. "What kind of technical difficulties?" I asked, maintaining a professional tone despite the satisfaction I felt at his obvious distress. "Performance issues, primarily. The platform is running significantly slower than normal, and some of the AI optimization features aren't functioning correctly. Marcus thinks it might be related to server configurations or database optimization, but we haven't been able to identify the root cause." David's explanation revealed just how little he understood about the technical crisis they were facing. Server configurations and database optimization were the kinds of surface-level issues that competent system administrators could resolve quickly. The real problem was buried much deeper in the platform's architecture, in code that Marcus couldn't read and David couldn't even conceptualize. "That does sound concerning," I replied sympathetically. "How long have you been experiencing these issues?" "Since yesterday morning," David said, which wasn't quite accurate. The performance degradation had started exactly 72 hours after my departure, but it had been gradual enough that they probably hadn't noticed it immediately. "Our enterprise clients are starting to complain, and we need to resolve this quickly to maintain our service-level agreements." Service-level agreements. The legal commitments StreamlineCore had made to clients like Microsoft and Amazon, promising specific performance benchmarks and uptime guarantees. Violating those agreements could result in financial penalties, contract cancellations, and permanent damage to the company's reputation in the enterprise software market. "I'd be happy to take a look," I said, pausing just long enough to let him think I was considering the request. "My consulting rate is $1,500 per hour, with a minimum engagement of 40 hours. Given the urgency of the situation, I could probably start this afternoon." $60,000 for someone who'd been dismissed as unnecessary. Just 3 days earlier, I was now commanding a premium consulting rate that would cost StreamlineCore more in 1 week than my annual salary had been. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "That's substantial," David replied carefully. "Would it be possible to discuss a more reasonable rate structure?" "David, you're dealing with a platform that generates $200 million in annual revenue," I pointed out. "If the performance issues continue, how much client revenue are you risking? $60,000 is probably less than you'll lose in contract penalties if this problem persists for another week." The silence on the other end of the line told me he was doing rapid mental calculations, probably with Emma Rodriguez whispering financial projections in his ear. They were trapped between paying my premium consulting rate or watching their enterprise contracts dissolve as clients switch to competing platforms. "Let me discuss this with our executive team and get back to you," David finally said. "How quickly could you start if we move forward?" "I'm available immediately," I replied. "But David, I should mention that resolving complex architectural issues can be unpredictable. 40 hours might be sufficient, but if the problems are deeper than they initially appear, it could require additional time. Translation. I was going to take my time diagnosing the problem, ensuring that StreamlineCore paid appropriately for their decision to dismiss me so callously. Every hour of consulting fees would serve as a reminder of what my ongoing contributions were actually worth. After ending the call with David, I remained in my booth at the grind, watching Austin's morning traffic flow past the windows while I considered my next moves. The immediate crisis at StreamlineCore was unfolding exactly as I'd planned, but I needed to think strategically about how to leverage this situation for maximum long-term benefit. Simply fixing the authentication issue and collecting consulting fees would provide short-term satisfaction, but it wouldn't address the fundamental problem of my contributions being systematically erased and undervalued. David, Marcus, and Emma had demonstrated that they were willing to steal credit for my work and dispose of me when convenient. Helping them resolve this crisis without securing more permanent protection would just enable them to repeat the same pattern in the future. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer Walsh, the CTO at Innovate Tech Solutions, who'd reached out about opportunities. Heard through the grapevine that StreamlineCore is having technical difficulties. If you're interested in discussing a leadership role here instead of consulting for your former employer, let's talk. Jennifer's timing was impeccable, and her message suggested that news of StreamlineCore's crisis was already spreading through Austin's tight-knit tech community. In a city where everyone knew everyone else's business, technical failures at prominent companies weren't secrets for long. If word was getting out that TaskFlow Pro was experiencing serious performance issues, StreamlineCore's reputation and valuation could suffer permanent damage. I typed back a brief response. Appreciate the outreach. May be interested depending on how current situation develops. Can we connect later this week? Keeping my options open was crucial. If David and his team proved unwilling to provide appropriate recognition and compensation for resolving their crisis, I wanted alternative opportunities already in motion. Innovate Tech had an excellent reputation for technical innovation and employee treatment, and Jennifer Walsh was known throughout the industry as a leader who valued and promoted talented developers. My laptop chimed with an email notification. The sender was Marcus Thompson, and the subject line read, "Urgent technical consultation needed." I opened the message with considerable curiosity about how Marcus would approach requesting help from someone he'd helped to displace. Hi, Sarah. Hope you're doing well in your transition. We're experiencing some technical challenges with TaskFlow Pro that could benefit from your expertise with the platform's original architecture. Would you be available for a brief consultation to help identify potential solutions? We're happy to compensate you appropriately for your time and insights. Marcus's email was a masterpiece of corporate diplomacy, acknowledging my expertise while carefully avoiding any admission that they'd made a mistake in removing me from the development team. The phrase "original architecture" was particularly interesting, suggesting that he understood TaskFlow Pro's current problems were related to fundamental design decisions rather than surface-level configuration issues. I crafted a polite but business-like response. Marcus, thanks for reaching out. I'd be happy to discuss a consulting arrangement. My current rate for TaskFlow Pro architecture consulting is $2,000 per hour, given the specialized nature of the platform and the urgency of your timeline. Let me know if you'd like to schedule a technical assessment. $2,000 per hour. $500 more than I'd quoted David, reflecting the additional premium for working with someone who'd actively participated in undermining my position at the company. If Marcus wanted my expertise badly enough, he'd pay the surcharge for his previous behavior. Within minutes, my phone was ringing again. This time it was Emma Rodriguez, StreamlineCore's CFO, calling directly. Sarah, this is Emma from StreamlineCore. I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly, but we have a situation that requires immediate attention. And I understand David and Marcus have both been in contact with you about consulting opportunities. Emma's approach was more direct than either David or Marcus had been, which I appreciated. As CFO, she was probably most acutely aware of the financial implications of TaskFlow Pro's performance problems and least interested in ego protection or face-saving measures. I've spoken with both of them, I confirmed. They've described some performance issues with the platform. Sarah, I'm going to be completely honest with you because we don't have time for diplomatic language, Emma said, her voice carrying the stress of someone dealing with a genuine crisis. TaskFlow Pro's performance has degraded to the point where we're receiving cancellation threats from major enterprise clients. Microsoft has already suspended their rollout pending resolution of the issues. Amazon is demanding immediate improvements, or they'll invoke their contract termination clause. Emma's directness was refreshing after David's attempts at corporate spin and Marcus's face-saving euphemisms. She understood that their situation was genuinely dire, and that attempting to minimize the crisis would only waste valuable time. That does sound serious, I acknowledged. What kind of timeline are you working with? Realistically, we have 48 hours to show significant improvement, or we're going to start losing contracts, Emma replied. Each major client we lose represents tens of millions in annual revenue. At some point, the financial damage becomes irrecoverable. 48 hours. Emma was being brutally honest about their predicament, which meant she was also probably prepared to be equally direct about what she was willing to pay for a solution. Emma, I appreciate your straightforward approach, I said. If you're serious about resolving this quickly, I'm prepared to prioritize StreamlineCore's situation. But given the urgency and the revenue at stake, my consulting rate would be $3,000 per hour, with a minimum 50-hour engagement. $150,000. It was an enormous sum for a consulting engagement, but it was also less than StreamlineCore would lose if they failed to retain even one of their major enterprise clients. That's expensive, Emma said after a brief pause, but probably justified given what's at stake. However, I need to know that you can actually resolve these issues. Our technical team has been working around the clock for 3 days without making any meaningful progress. This was the moment of truth. Emma was offering to pay my premium rate, but she needed assurance that I could deliver results. The ethical implications of my situation were complex. I wasn't sabotaging TaskFlow Pro maliciously, but I had built a failsafe that would continue causing problems until I resolved it. Was it ethical to charge premium consulting fees to fix a problem I'd deliberately created? On the other hand, the failsafe wasn't arbitrary or vindictive. It was a legitimate security measure I'd implemented to protect my intellectual property from exactly the kind of appropriation that had occurred. StreamlineCore had benefited from my innovations for 3 years, generated $200 million in revenue from my work, and then dismissed me without appropriate recognition or compensation. Charging them to fix the consequences of their own actions seemed like poetic justice rather than unethical exploitation. Emma, I designed TaskFlow Pro's core architecture, I said confidently. I understand every component, every integration, and every potential point of failure. If the problems can be resolved, I can resolve them. But I need complete access to the system and full authority to make necessary changes without interference from Marcus or anyone else on the technical team. Done, Emma replied immediately. When can you start? The speed of her acceptance told me just how desperate their situation had become. Emma was willing to pay my premium rate and grant me complete technical authority because she understood that the alternative was watching StreamlineCore's valuation collapse as clients fled to competing platforms. I can be in the office this afternoon, I said. But Emma, I want to be clear about the scope of this engagement. I'm not just troubleshooting surface-level performance issues. I'm going to need to examine the entire platform architecture to identify and resolve the root causes of the problems you're experiencing. Whatever you need, Emma said. I'll send you a consulting agreement within the hour, and I'll make sure everyone on the technical team understands that you have complete authority to make necessary changes." After ending the call with Emma, I closed my laptop and finished my latte while contemplating the strange turn my life had taken. A week ago, I'd been an undervalued employee watching other people take credit for my innovations. Now I was about to return to StreamlineCore as a highly paid consultant with complete technical authority and the power to save or destroy the company's most valuable asset. The transformation felt surreal, but it also felt like justice. David, Marcus, and their allies had made a calculated decision to remove me from the company after extracting maximum value from my contributions. They'd assumed that TaskFlow Pro could continue operating successfully without my ongoing involvement, and they were about to discover how wrong that assumption had been. As I walked back to my apartment to prepare for my return to StreamlineCore, I reflected on the lessons I'd learned about the tech industry and corporate politics. Talent and hard work weren't enough to guarantee fair treatment or appropriate recognition. If you wanted to protect your contributions and ensure your value was properly acknowledged, you needed to build that protection into your work itself. My failsafe hadn't been designed as a weapon, but as insurance. It ensured that anyone who wanted to benefit from my innovations would need to maintain an ongoing relationship with me on fair terms. David and his team were about to learn that stealing someone's life work came with consequences they'd never anticipated. The next few hours would determine whether this crisis led to a genuine reconciliation and appropriate recognition, or whether it simply demonstrated that StreamlineCore was beyond redemption. Either way, I was finally in a position to control my own destiny, rather than hoping that others would recognize my value voluntarily. Walking through downtown Austin toward my apartment, I felt more confident and empowered than I had in months. The city's afternoon energy surrounded me, with food trucks serving lunch crowds and cyclists navigating between cars on the busy streets. This was my town, my community, and my opportunity to demonstrate what happened when talent was undervalued and then desperately needed. StreamlineCore's crisis was just beginning, and I was about to show them exactly what my contributions had been worth all along. The second call from David came at 11:30 p.m. on Thursday night, waking me from the first peaceful sleep I'd had in weeks. His voice carried a desperation that hadn't been there during our afternoon conversation, and I could hear muffled voices and frantic activity in the background. "Sarah, I'm sorry to call so late, but we have a crisis," David said without preamble. TaskFlow Pro has completely crashed for Tesla's manufacturing division. Their entire production line is down because they can't access their workflow optimization protocols. They're threatening to terminate their contract and pursue damages for lost production time. I sat up in bed, fully alert despite the late hour. Tesla's manufacturing workflow was one of TaskFlow Pro's most complex implementations, requiring real-time coordination between dozens of automated systems and hundreds of human operators. If that integration had failed completely, it meant the authentication timeout was cascading through interconnected systems in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. "When did the Tesla system go down?" I asked, reaching for my laptop to check the platform's global status remotely. "About an hour ago," David replied, his voice tight with panic. "Their night shift supervisor called our emergency support line, but nobody on our technical team understands their custom implementation well enough to diagnose the problem. We've been trying to reach you for 30 minutes. Tesla's contract with StreamlineCore included strict uptime guarantees and penalty clauses for system failures that disrupted manufacturing operations. A single hour of downtime at their Austin Gigafactory could cost millions in lost production, and StreamlineCore would be liable for damages if the failure was attributed to platform deficiencies rather than external factors. Have you tried the standard diagnostic procedures?" I asked, though I already knew they would be ineffective against an authentication failure embedded in the system's core architecture. "Marcus has been running diagnostics for 45 minutes, David said, his frustration bleeding through his attempted professionalism. "Everything looks normal from a technical standpoint. but the AI optimization modules aren't responding to any commands. It's like they're frozen, but not crashed. The description perfectly matched what I'd expected when the authentication timeout affected more complex integrations. Tesla's manufacturing systems depended on TaskFlow Pro's most sophisticated algorithms for real-time optimization and predictive maintenance scheduling. Without proper authentication, those algorithms would appear to function normally while producing meaningless outputs that couldn't interface with the manufacturing control systems. David, this sounds like it might be related to the performance issues you mentioned earlier, I said carefully. If the problems are systemic rather than isolated to specific clients, you might be dealing with a more fundamental platform issue. That's what we're afraid of, David admitted. Sarah, I know we discussed consulting terms earlier, but this has become an emergency situation. Tesla is talking about invoking force majeure clauses and seeking damages that could reach 8 figures. We need someone who understands TaskFlow Pro's architecture at the deepest level. 8 figures. David was talking about potential damages in the tens of millions of dollars, which would devastate StreamlineCore's financial position and probably trigger bankruptcy proceedings. The company's entire valuation was built on the success of TaskFlow Pro, and losing their largest manufacturing client would signal to other enterprise customers that the platform couldn't be trusted for mission-critical operations. I can be at Tesla's facility within an hour, I offered. But David, working directly with their manufacturing systems, will require complete administrative access and authority to make whatever changes are necessary to restore functionality. Done, David said immediately. Whatever access you need, whatever authority you require, just tell me what Tesla needs to hear to keep their production lines running. The speed of his agreement told me just how desperate the situation had become. David was willing to grant me unlimited technical authority because the alternative was watching StreamlineCore collapse under the weight of contractual penalties and damaged reputation. I'll head to Tesla's Gigafactory now, I said, already, getting dressed while balancing the phone against my shoulder. Text me the contact information for their night shift supervisor and any relevant system access credentials. Sarah, David said as I was about to hang up, I know this situation is complicated given our earlier conversation, but I want you to know that we're prepared to discuss any terms necessary to resolve this crisis and prevent future occurrences. Any terms necessary. David was essentially offering me a blank check to save StreamlineCore from financial ruin, though he probably didn't fully understand the implications of that promise. I was about to demonstrate just how much leverage my technical expertise provided when the company's most valuable relationships were at stake. Tesla's Austin Gigafactory was a monument to modern manufacturing, its massive facilities humming with automated production lines that operated around the clock. But tonight, significant portions of the factory floor were ominously quiet, with workers standing around idle equipment waiting for their workflow optimization systems to come back online. Miguel Santos, Tesla's night shift manufacturing supervisor, met me at the security checkpoint with an expression that mixed hope and skepticism. At 45, with graying hair and the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades managing complex manufacturing operations, Miguel had probably seen every possible type of system failure during his career. You're the TaskFlow Pro expert. StreamlineCore sent? He asked, scanning my visitor badge while leading me through the facility's labyrinthine corridors. I have to be honest. We've had 3 different technical consultants here in the past 2 hours, and none of them could even explain why the system appears to be running normally while producing completely useless outputs. Miguel's description confirmed my understanding of how the authentication failure was manifesting in Tesla's complex manufacturing environment. The TaskFlow Pro interface would show normal operations, but the underlying AI algorithms were running on backup protocols that couldn't properly interface with Tesla's specialized production control systems. I designed the original integration between TaskFlow Pro and Tesla's manufacturing workflows. I explained as we walked past dormant assembly lines. I should be able to identify what's causing the disconnect between the optimization algorithms and your production systems. Miguel nodded, though his expression remained cautious. I hope so, because we're losing about $2 million every hour that these lines stay down. Corporate is already asking questions about whether we should accelerate our contingency planning for alternative workflow management systems. $2 million per hour. Tesla's threat to terminate their StreamlineCore contract wasn't just posturing. They were calculating real financial losses and evaluating whether TaskFlow Pro's benefits justified the risk of continued system failures. If they decided to switch to competing platforms, other enterprise clients would probably follow their lead. The control room overlooking Tesla's main production floor was a high-tech command center with wall-mounted displays showing real-time metrics from hundreds of manufacturing processes. Under normal circumstances, TaskFlow Pro's AI optimization would be continuously adjusting production parameters to maximize efficiency while minimizing waste and downtime. Tonight, those displays showed static numbers and unresponsive interfaces, clear evidence that the workflow optimization systems weren't functioning despite appearing operational to casual observation. Show me exactly what happened when the system stopped working, I said, settling in front of the main control terminal while Miguel pulled up logs from the evening's production data. Everything was running normally until about midnight, Miguel explained, pointing to performance. Charts that showed steady optimization metrics suddenly flatline. The TaskFlow Pro interface didn't show any error messages or system failures, but the AI recommendations stopped updating and the predictive maintenance schedules became completely random. I examined the system logs carefully, noting the precise timestamp when Tesla's manufacturing optimization had degraded. It corresponded exactly with the 72-hour authentication timeout, confirming that the failure was related to my biometric failsafe, rather than any technical problems with Tesla's equipment or network infrastructure. Miguel, I think I've identified the root cause of the problem, I said, pulling up TaskFlow Pro's authentication protocols on my laptop. The platform includes security verification systems that ensure continued access to advanced AI functions. It appears those verification processes have experienced a failure that's affecting the optimization algorithms. Miguel leaned over my shoulder to examine the code I was displaying, his manufacturing background giving him enough technical knowledge to understand the basic concept, even if he couldn't read the specific programming languages involved. So this isn't a problem with our equipment or network infrastructure? He asked hopefully. No, this is entirely a TaskFlow Pro platform issue, I confirmed. Your manufacturing systems are functioning perfectly. The problem is that the workflow optimization algorithms aren't receiving proper authentication to access the advanced AI functions that make them effective for your production environment. Relief was evident in Miguel's expression as he realized that Tesla's manufacturing systems weren't fundamentally broken. But that relief was quickly replaced by concern about how long it would take to restore proper functionality. How quickly? Can this authentication issue be resolved? He pressed. I can restore full functionality within about 30 minutes, I replied, beginning the process of accessing TaskFlow Pro's core authentication systems. But Miguel, I need to make you aware that this type of security failure suggests deeper issues with how the platform's technical architecture is being managed. Miguel's expression sharpened with interest. As someone responsible for maintaining complex manufacturing systems, he understood that intermittent failures often indicated systemic problems rather than isolated technical glitches. What kind of deeper issues? He asked directly. I chose my words carefully, wanting to be honest about TaskFlow Pro's situation without undermining confidence in the platform's fundamental reliability. The authentication systems that govern access to advanced AI functions require ongoing maintenance and oversight from the platform's original developers. Recent changes in StreamlineCore's technical leadership may have affected their ability to properly maintain these critical security protocols. Miguel processed this information with the analytical mindset of someone who'd spent decades managing mission-critical manufacturing systems. He understood that complex technical platforms required specialized expertise that couldn't be easily transferred or replaced. Are you saying that StreamlineCore doesn't have adequate technical expertise to maintain the platform they're selling? Us? He asked pointedly. I'm saying that maintaining TaskFlow Pro's advanced features requires specific knowledge of the platform's security architecture that may not be adequately documented or transferred within their current development team, I replied diplomatically. This conversation was serving multiple purposes beyond restoring Tesla's manufacturing systems. Miguel's concerns about StreamlineCore's technical competence would probably be reported to Tesla's procurement and engineering teams, who would evaluate whether their workflow optimization contract provided adequate reliability guarantees. If Tesla concluded that TaskFlow Pro's failures were likely to recur due to inadequate technical leadership at StreamlineCore, they might accelerate their timeline for implementing alternative solutions. That possibility would give me additional leverage in my negotiations with David about appropriate recognition and compensation for my ongoing involvement. As I worked through the authentication restoration process, my phone buzzed with increasingly frantic messages from StreamlineCore's leadership team. Emma Rodriguez had sent financial projections showing the potential impact of losing Tesla's contract. Marcus Thompson was asking for technical updates he could provide to other clients who were beginning to report similar performance issues. David was requesting hourly status reports on the Tesla situation. The authentication restoration proceeded, exactly as I'd designed it to, requiring my biometric verification to unlock the advanced AI algorithms that Tesla's manufacturing systems depended on. Within 20 minutes, the workflow optimization displays began showing live updates again, and the predictive maintenance schedules returned to their normal intelligent recommendations. Miguel watched the transformation with obvious relief as his production control systems came back to life. Assembly line efficiency metrics began climbing toward their optimal ranges, and the automated quality control processes resumed their sophisticated monitoring and adjustment protocols. That's incredible, Miguel said, observing the real-time optimization adjustments that TaskFlow Pro was making to Tesla's manufacturing workflows. It's like the system suddenly became intelligent again after running on autopilot for hours. The AI optimization algorithms are quite sophisticated when they're functioning properly, I agreed, monitoring the restored system performance across Tesla's various production lines. The platform's value comes from these advanced capabilities that distinguish it from basic workflow management tools. Miguel nodded thoughtfully, then turned to face me directly with a serious expression. Sarah, I need to ask you something confidentially. Based on what you've seen tonight, how confident should Tesla be in TaskFlow Pro's continued reliability? We're making significant business decisions based on the workflow optimizations this platform provides. The question was both professional and personal for Miguel. Tesla's manufacturing efficiency depended on TaskFlow Pro's AI recommendations, and any unreliability could affect production targets, quality metrics, and ultimately Miguel's own performance evaluations. Miguel, TaskFlow Pro is fundamentally a robust and sophisticated platform, I said honestly. The technical capabilities are genuinely revolutionary, and the manufacturing optimizations you're seeing are real competitive advantages. However, maintaining those capabilities requires ongoing expertise in the platform's architecture and security systems. And does StreamlineCore currently have that expertise? Miguel pressed. I paused before answering, considering how much honesty was appropriate given my complicated relationship with StreamlineCore and my ongoing negotiations with their leadership team. That's a question you should ask StreamlineCore directly, I replied carefully. But I would recommend that Tesla's procurement team seeks specific assurances about technical leadership continuity and platform maintenance capabilities before committing to long-term contract extensions. Miguel understood the implications of my diplomatic response. Tesla would probably be conducting their own evaluation of StreamlineCore's technical competence and considering contingency plans for workflow optimization if TaskFlow Pro proved unreliable. As we completed the system restoration and verified that all manufacturing workflows were operating normally, my phone rang with yet another call from David. His relief was audible when I answered. "Sarah, Miguel Santos just confirmed that Tesla's systems are back online," David said, his voice carrying exhaustion mixed with gratitude. "I can't thank you enough for resolving this crisis so quickly." "I'm glad I could help," I replied professionally. "The authentication issue has been resolved, and Tesla's manufacturing optimization should continue functioning normally." "About that authentication issue," David said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "Emma and I have been discussing the broader implications of what happened tonight. We need to ensure that this type of failure doesn't recur, especially with our other enterprise clients." David was beginning to understand that tonight's crisis wasn't an isolated technical glitch, but a symptom of deeper problems with StreamlineCore's approach to platform maintenance and technical leadership. "David, preventing future authentication. Failures will require ongoing access to the platform's core security systems by someone with intimate knowledge of the architecture," I said. "That's not something that can be delegated to junior developers or managed through standard IT protocols." "We understand that now," David replied. "Sarah, when you have time tomorrow, could we schedule a comprehensive discussion about technical leadership arrangements that would prevent these kinds of emergencies?" Technical leadership arrangements. David was finally ready to acknowledge that maintaining TaskFlow Pro required my ongoing involvement at a level of authority and compensation that reflected the platform's actual value to StreamlineCore's business. "I'm available tomorrow afternoon," I said. "But David, any discussion about ongoing arrangements should include Emma and the board of directors. The decisions we need to make about technical leadership will affect StreamlineCore's fundamental business strategy." "Agreed," David said immediately. "I'll coordinate with Emma to set up a board-level meeting. Sarah, I want you to know that we recognize tonight's events have demonstrated capabilities and value that weren't properly acknowledged in our previous working relationship." After ending the call with David, I spent another hour at Tesla's facility working with Miguel to document the evening's events and establish monitoring protocols that would provide early warning if similar authentication issues occurred in the future. Miguel walked me back to the security checkpoint as the factory's day shift arrived to take over operations that were now running smoothly again. "Sarah, I don't know what your situation is with StreamlineCore, but from Tesla's perspective, the reason our manufacturing lines are running efficiently right now." "I appreciate that, Miguel," I replied. "TaskFlow Pro is a platform I'm personally invested in seeing succeed, regardless of corporate politics or contractual arrangements." Driving back to Austin through the pre-dawn darkness, I reflected on how dramatically the situation with StreamlineCore had evolved over the past 24 hours. Yesterday morning, I'd been a dismissed employee considering job opportunities with competing companies. Tonight, I was the person who'd saved their most important client relationship and potentially prevented the company's financial collapse. The authentication crisis had served its intended purpose of demonstrating my ongoing value to TaskFlow Pro's success, but it had also revealed the extent to which StreamlineCore's leadership had underestimated the complexity of maintaining the platform they were selling to enterprise clients. David's willingness to grant me unlimited technical authority during the Tesla crisis showed that he understood the stakes involved, even if he hadn't previously acknowledged my essential role in the platform's continued operation. Emma's financial projections probably made it clear that losing major enterprise clients would destroy StreamlineCore's valuation and potentially trigger bankruptcy. Most importantly, clients like Tesla were beginning to question StreamlineCore's technical competence and evaluate alternative solutions for their workflow optimization needs. Miguel's pointed questions about platform reliability and technical leadership continuity were probably being echoed in procurement discussions at Microsoft, Amazon, and other enterprise clients. My phone buzzed with a text message from Rachel, who'd apparently been following the evening's developments from the StreamlineCore office. "Heard you saved Tesla's manufacturing lines. Marcus has been pacing around the office all night looking like he's seen a ghost. David called an emergency executive meeting for 6 a.m. The emergency executive meeting was probably focused on damage control and long-term strategy for maintaining enterprise-client relationships. David, Emma, and Marcus would be discussing how to prevent future authentication failures while avoiding public acknowledgement that their platform's continued operation depended on someone they'd recently fired. But their options were limited. They could try to reverse engineer the authentication systems I'd built, but that would require months of development work and risk introducing new vulnerabilities into TaskFlow Pro's security architecture. They could attempt to hire external consultants with sufficient expertise, but that would expose their intellectual property to competitors and raise questions about their internal technical capabilities. Or they could negotiate a genuine partnership with me that acknowledged my essential role in TaskFlow Pro's success and provided appropriate compensation and authority for my ongoing contributions. Given the financial stakes involved and the immediate threat to their enterprise contracts, the third option was becoming increasingly attractive, despite their previous resistance to recognizing my value. As I reached my East Austin apartment, the sun was beginning to rise over the city skyline, illuminating StreamlineCore's building among the downtown towers. Somewhere in that building, David and his executive team were probably conducting their emergency meeting, trying to develop strategies for managing a crisis they'd inadvertently created by underestimating the complexity of their own platform. The next few hours would determine whether StreamlineCore's leadership was capable of learning from their mistakes and building a genuine partnership based on mutual respect and appropriate recognition, or whether they would continue attempting to maintain control through corporate politics rather than technical competence. Either way, I was finally in a position to negotiate from strength, rather than hoping that my contributions would be voluntarily acknowledged. The authentication crisis had demonstrated my leverage in terms that even non-technical executives could understand. TaskFlow Pro, without my ongoing involvement, wasn't worth $200 million in annual revenue. The platform would continue generating that revenue only as long as StreamlineCore maintained a relationship with me that reflected the reality of my essential contributions. After 3 years of having my work appropriated and my value minimized, I was finally in control of my own professional destiny. My phone buzzed with one final message before I headed inside to get some sleep before the afternoon's crucial negotiations. It was from Jennifer Walsh at Innovate Tech Solutions. "Heard through industry contacts that you handled a major crisis for StreamlineCore last night. Regardless of how things develop with them, Innovate Tech would be honored to discuss leadership, opportunities where technical expertise is properly valued from day one." Jennifer's message reminded me that I had alternatives beyond StreamlineCore, options that might provide better long-term career satisfaction without the complications of my current situation. But it also reinforced that my actions over the past week had enhanced my reputation throughout Austin's tech community as someone who could solve complex problems that stumped other developers. Whether I continued with StreamlineCore or pursued opportunities elsewhere, I demonstrated that technical expertise combined with strategic thinking could overcome even the most challenging professional situations. The authentication crisis had been resolved, but the broader questions about recognition, authority, and fair compensation were just beginning to be addressed. The afternoon's board meeting would determine whether StreamlineCore was capable of evolving into a company that properly valued technical contributions, or whether my future lay with organizations that already understood the importance of treating essential talent with appropriate respect and recognition. Walking back into StreamlineCore's gleaming lobby felt like entering a parallel universe where everything looked familiar, but the power dynamics had completely shifted. The same marble floors, the same modern art installations, the same panoramic views of Austin's skyline. But now I was here as a premium consultant commanding $3,000 per hour instead of a dismissed employee clearing out her desk. The receptionist, Amanda, looked genuinely surprised to see me. "Sarah, I heard you were... welcome back. Are you here for a meeting?" "Consulting engagement," I replied with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Emma Rodriguez is expecting me." Amanda's confusion was understandable. The company rumor mill had probably been working overtime since my departure, and now here I was, less than a week later, walking through the lobby like I owned the place. Which technically I still partially did, though my 20% equity stake had been conveniently forgotten during all the recent drama. The elevator ride to the 35th floor gave me time to center myself for what was about to unfold. I'd spent the morning preparing not just technically, but psychologically. This wasn't about revenge, though the satisfaction would be considerable. This was about establishing my true value and ensuring that my contributions could never again be dismissed or appropriated without consequences. Emma Rodriguez was waiting for me when the elevator doors opened, her usually composed demeanor showing cracks of stress around the edges. As CFO, she understood better than anyone what was at stake financially, and the past few days had probably been a nightmare of client calls, contract reviews, and damage control calculations. "Sarah, thank you for coming in so quickly," she said, extending her hand for a professional handshake. "I know this situation is unusual, but we genuinely need your expertise to resolve these issues." Emma's directness was refreshing. Unlike David's attempts at corporate diplomacy or Marcus's face-saving euphemisms, she was acknowledging the reality of their situation without pretense. They needed me, and she wasn't going to waste time pretending otherwise. "I'm here to help," I replied, matching her professional tone. "Where would you like me to set up?" "We've prepared the main conference room for you, with full network access and administrative privileges on all systems," Emma said, leading me down the hallway past curious colleagues who tried not to stare. Too obviously. "Marcus is coordinating with the technical team to provide whatever support you need." The main conference room was StreamlineCore's crown jewel, a glass-walled space with a massive display screen and seating for 20 people. Normally reserved for client presentations and board meetings, it was now my temporary command center, complete with multiple laptops, network cables, and administrative access to every system in the company. Marcus Thompson was already there, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his confident demeanor replaced by barely controlled panic. The transformation was striking. 3 days ago, he'd been the golden boy taking over my life's work. Now he looked like a man drowning in responsibilities he couldn't handle. "Sarah, I can't tell you how grateful we are that you're here," Marcus said, his voice carrying a desperate edge that hadn't been there during our transition meetings. "We've been working around the clock, but nothing we've tried has made any meaningful difference." I settled into the chair at the head of the conference table, opened my laptop, and began connecting to StreamlineCore's network infrastructure. The familiar interfaces and system layouts felt like coming home, except now I was being paid premium rates to access systems I'd built with my own hands. "Walk me through what you've tried so far," I said, pulling up TaskFlow Pro's system architecture, diagrams on the main display screen. Marcus consulted his notebook, flipping through pages of increasingly frantic handwriting. "We've restarted all the application servers, optimized the database queries, increased memory allocation for the AI processing modules, and checked every configuration file we could find. The platform keeps running, but it's like it's stuck, in slow motion." Every solution Marcus described addressed surface-level performance issues while completely missing the underlying authentication failure that was causing the problems. It was like trying to fix a car's engine problems by washing the windshield. The efforts weren't harmful, but they were entirely irrelevant to the actual issue. "What about the error logs?" I asked, though I already knew what they'd found. "That's the strange part," Marcus replied, his frustration evident. "The error logs show normal operations. No crashes, no obvious failures, just routine system messages, but the performance metrics are terrible, and the AI recommendations are completely unreliable. I nodded thoughtfully, pulling up the system monitoring dashboards that showed TaskFlow Pro's current performance metrics. Response times were indeed abysmal, averaging 15 to 20 seconds for operations that should complete in milliseconds. The AI optimization algorithms were producing random outputs instead of intelligent recommendations. To external observers, it looked like the platform was suffering from mysterious technical degradation, but I could see exactly what was happening. Without proper authentication from my biometric failsafe, TaskFlow Pro was running on backup algorithms designed for basic functionality rather than the sophisticated AI-powered optimization that made it worth $200 million. The platform worked, but it worked like a generic task management tool instead of the revolutionary productivity solution I'd created. "Have you examined the authentication protocols?" I asked casually, watching Marcus's reaction carefully. Marcus looked confused. Authentication for user logins? That's all working normally. Clients can access their accounts without any problems. Not user authentication, I clarified. System authentication, the background processes that verify platform integrity and enable advanced features. The blank expression on Marcus's face told me everything I needed to know. He'd been staring at my code for 3 days without understanding the deeper security architecture that governed TaskFlow Pro's most critical functions. The failsafe I'd built was invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look, disguised as routine security protocols that appeared unimportant to casual examination. I'm not familiar with any system authentication beyond the standard user login processes, Marcus admitted reluctantly. Rachel Green, who'd been quietly observing from the corner of the room, spoke up for the first time. "Sarah, when you built the platform's security architecture, did you implement any background verification systems that might require periodic updates or maintenance?" Rachel's question was more perceptive than Marcus's entire 3-day investigation. She understood that complex software platforms often included automated security measures that operated invisibly until they failed, and she was smart enough to ask the right person about architectural decisions she hadn't been involved in making. "That's an excellent question, Rachel," I replied, turning my attention to the authentication module code on my laptop screen. "Let me examine the security protocols to see if there are any verification processes that might be experiencing issues." I spent the next hour performing what appeared to be a comprehensive security audit, examining various authentication systems and running diagnostic tests on different platform components. In reality, I was documenting the failsafe mechanism I'd built, preparing to explain how it worked and why it had been triggered. The performance of this technical theater served multiple purposes. First, it demonstrated to Marcus and the observing technical team that resolving TaskFlow Pro's problems required intimate knowledge of the platform's architecture that none of them possessed. Second, it provided justification for the premium consulting fees I was charging, showing that this wasn't a simple fix, but a complex technical investigation. Finally, it built anticipation for the eventual revelation of what was actually wrong. Emma Rodriguez appeared in the conference room doorway, her expression tense with barely controlled anxiety. "Sarah, how's the diagnosis coming? I just got off a call with Amazon's procurement team, and they're giving us until end of business tomorrow to show substantial improvement, or they're invoking their termination clause." The timeline was becoming even more compressed. Emma's update meant that StreamlineCore had less than 24 hours to resolve the performance issues or face the loss of a $50 million annual contract. The financial pressure was enormous, and everyone in the room could feel it. "I'm making progress," I replied calmly. "I've identified what appears to be an authentication failure in one of the core security modules. The platform is running on backup algorithms because it can't verify certain critical system components." Marcus leaned forward with desperate interest. "Can you fix it? How long will it take?" "That depends on the nature of the authentication failure," I said, pulling up the relevant code on the main display screen. The security architecture includes biometric verification for critical system functions designed to prevent unauthorized modification of the platform's core algorithms. The word biometric caused a stir of confusion around the room. Most of the technical team had never encountered biometric authentication in enterprise software contexts, and they certainly hadn't expected to find it embedded in TaskFlow Pro's architecture. Biometric verification? Emma asked sharply. What kind of biometric data? And why wasn't this documented in our system specifications? This was the moment I'd been building toward, the revelation that would transform their understanding of both the crisis and my role in resolving it. I turned away from my laptop to face the room directly, making eye contact with Emma, Marcus, and the assembled technical team. The biometric authentication was part of the original security architecture I designed to protect TaskFlow Pro's proprietary algorithms, I explained calmly. It requires periodic verification from the platform's original developer to ensure continued access to the advanced AI functions that differentiate TaskFlow Pro from generic productivity tools. The silence that followed was absolute. Emma's face went through a series of expressions as she processed the implications of what I'd just revealed. Marcus looked like he'd been physically struck. Rachel nodded slowly, a mixture of understanding and admiration crossing her features as she realized the elegant solution I'd built to protect my intellectual property. "You're saying," Emma said carefully, "that TaskFlow Pro's advanced features require your personal authentication to continue functioning?" "That's correct," I confirmed. The failsafe was designed to protect the platform's most valuable algorithms from unauthorized use or modification. Without proper authentication, the system defaults to basic functionality to prevent intellectual property theft. Marcus found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. "How often does this authentication need to be renewed?" "Every 72 hours, I replied. The last authentication occurred before my departure from StreamlineCore, which means the system has been running on backup algorithms since Monday morning. The timeline aligned perfectly with when they'd first noticed performance problems. Emma was doing rapid mental calculations, probably realizing that my departure and the platform's degradation weren't coincidental, but directly connected through a security system none of them had known existed. "This is impossible," Marcus said, his voice rising with a mixture of anger and panic. "You can't build authentication requirements into software without documenting them. That's sabotage." "It's not sabotage," I replied evenly. "It's intellectual property protection. The biometric authentication system is clearly documented in the original security architecture specifications I provided during the platform's development. The documentation explains that advanced features require ongoing developer verification to prevent unauthorized use." This wasn't entirely true. While I had documented the existence of security protocols, I'd been deliberately vague about their specific implementation to prevent exactly the kind of appropriation that had ultimately occurred. But the documentation was sufficient to provide legal cover for the failsafe mechanism. Emma was studying me with a mixture of respect and wariness. As a business executive, she could appreciate the elegance of what I'd done, even while recognizing the leverage it gave me over the company's most valuable asset. "What would be required to restore full functionality?" she asked directly. "I need to re-authenticate the system using my biometric credentials," I replied. "The process takes about 30 minutes and will restore all advanced features immediately." "And future authentication requirements?" Emma pressed. "The system is designed to require periodic re-authentication to maintain security," I said. "However, the authentication protocols can be modified to accommodate different operational requirements depending on the terms of my ongoing relationship with StreamlineCore." The implications were clear. I could fix their immediate crisis quickly, But the long-term solution would require negotiating a new arrangement that recognized my ongoing value to the platform's operation. I had effectively demonstrated that TaskFlow Pro without my continued involvement wasn't worth $200 million in annual revenue. Marcus was staring at me with a mixture of admiration and horror. You planned this whole thing. You knew exactly what would happen when you left. I planned to protect my intellectual property, I corrected. What happened was that StreamlineCore dismissed the person whose ongoing involvement was essential to the platform's continued success. The authentication failure was a natural consequence of that decision. Emma stood up abruptly, her business mind clearly working through the implications and possibilities. I need to brief David and the board on this situation immediately. Sarah, can you restore functionality temporarily while we discuss long-term arrangements? Of course, I replied. I'm here to help resolve the crisis. But Emma, I think it's important that any long-term arrangement acknowledges the reality of my contributions to TaskFlow Pro's value. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely. An hour ago, I'd been a consultant brought in to fix mysterious technical problems. Now everyone understood that I wasn't just someone who could solve their crisis, but the person whose dismissal had caused it in the first place. Rachel approached me as Emma hurried out to contact David and the board. Sarah, that was brilliant, she said quietly. I can't believe you built that protection into the system without anyone realizing it. It wasn't about being clever, I replied honestly. It was about recognizing that in this industry, your work can be taken away from you at any moment unless you build protections into the work itself. Over the next 2 hours, I restored TaskFlow Pro to full functionality, while StreamlineCore's leadership conducted emergency meetings to determine their response. The authentication process was exactly as straightforward as I'd promised, requiring only my biometric verification to unlock the advanced algorithms that made the platform revolutionary. Within minutes of completing the authentication, TaskFlow Pro's performance metrics returned to normal. Response times dropped from 20 seconds to milliseconds. The AI optimization algorithms began producing intelligent recommendations again. The platform transformed from a sluggish generic tool back into the sophisticated productivity solution that had attracted $200 million in enterprise contracts. The technical team watched in amazement as their monitoring dashboards showed the dramatic improvement in real time. Marcus looked simultaneously relieved and devastated, understanding that his incompetence had been exposed while also recognizing that the crisis was finally resolving. My phone buzzed with calls from enterprise clients who'd been monitoring the platform's performance. Microsoft's project managers confirmed that their workflow optimization had returned to 40%. Improvement. Amazon's logistics team reported that task synchronization was functioning normally again. Tesla's manufacturing workflows were back online with full AI optimization capabilities. David Chen appeared in the conference room as I was packing up my laptop, his expression carefully controlled, but his stress evident in the tension around his eyes. The confident CEO who dismissed me a week earlier was gone, replaced by someone who'd just learned that his company's most valuable asset depended entirely on the person he'd fired. Sarah, I understand you've resolved the immediate technical issues, he said, his tone formal and cautious. I want to thank you for your professionalism in helping us through this crisis. You're welcome, I replied simply, continuing to organize my equipment without rushing to fill the silence that followed. David cleared his throat uncomfortably. I think it's clear that we need to discuss a more permanent arrangement. Your expertise with TaskFlow Pro's architecture is obviously essential to the platform's continued operation. Essential. The word he'd avoided using a week earlier when explaining why my contributions were no longer needed. Now, faced with the concrete evidence of what TaskFlow Pro was worth without my ongoing involvement, he was forced to acknowledge reality. I'm open to discussing various arrangements, I said, finally looking up to meet his eyes directly. But, David, Any long-term relationship would need to be based on appropriate recognition of my contributions and fair compensation for my ongoing involvement. Of course, David agreed quickly. We obviously underestimated the complexity of transitioning the platform's technical leadership. I think we can work out terms that acknowledge your unique expertise and ensure appropriate compensation. Emma Rodriguez entered the conference room carrying a stack of documents and wearing the expression of someone who'd spent hours negotiating complex financial arrangements under extreme time pressure. Sarah, I've prepared several options for ongoing technical consulting arrangements, she announced, spreading contracts across the conference table. Given the specialized nature of your expertise and the platform's authentication requirements, we're prepared to offer very competitive terms. I reviewed the proposed contracts carefully, noting the substantial increases in compensation, equity restoration, and formal recognition of my technical leadership. The terms were generous, reflecting both the value of my contributions and StreamlineCore's desperation to ensure continued access to my expertise. These are reasonable starting points, I said diplomatically. But I'd like to add some specific provisions regarding intellectual property recognition and future technical decision-making authority. Emma nodded approvingly. What did you have in mind? First, formal recognition of my role as TaskFlow Pro's original architect and ongoing technical lead, including appropriate credit in all marketing materials and client communications. Second, final authority over all technical architecture decisions affecting the platform's core algorithms. Third, a seat on StreamlineCore's board of directors, reflecting my equity stake and technical leadership role. David's expression tightened at the mention of a board seat, but Emma was already nodding her agreement. As CFO, she understood that my demands were reasonable given what I'd demonstrated about my leverage over the company's primary revenue source. Those terms seem appropriate, Emma said, glancing at David to gauge his reaction. The board seat particularly makes sense given your equity position and essential role in the platform's success. The negotiation continued for another hour, working through details of compensation, technical authority, and recognition that should have been established years earlier. Throughout the process, I maintained focus on creating sustainable arrangements rather than maximizing short-term advantage. The goal wasn't to punish StreamlineCore for their previous mistakes, but to establish a foundation for genuine partnership moving forward. As we finalized the agreements, Marcus Thompson appeared in the doorway, his expression humble in a way I'd never seen before. The arrogant marketing executive who'd claimed credit for my innovations was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned exactly what he didn't know about software development. Sarah, I owe you an apology, he said quietly. I completely misunderstood the complexity of what you'd built, and I made assumptions about technical leadership that were obviously wrong. I hope we can work together effectively going forward. Marcus's apology was probably motivated more by necessity than genuine remorse, but it represented a significant shift from his previous attitude. He'd learned that understanding software required more than buzzwords and business jargon, and that technical expertise couldn't be faked or transferred through job titles alone. I appreciate that, Marcus, I replied. Moving forward, I think we'll all benefit from clearer communication about technical capabilities and limitations. As the sun set over Austin's skyline, visible through the conference room's floor-to-ceiling windows, I reflected on the extraordinary transformation of the past week. 7 days ago, I'd been a dismissed employee watching others take credit for my life's work. Now I was StreamlineCore's recognized technical leader, with formal authority over the platform I'd created and appropriate compensation for my ongoing contributions. The failsafe I'd built into TaskFlow Pro had served its purpose perfectly, not as a weapon of revenge, but as a demonstration of value that couldn't be ignored or appropriated. StreamlineCore's leadership had learned that dismissing essential contributors carried consequences they hadn't anticipated, and that true technical expertise couldn't be replaced by corporate politics or management theories. Emma Rodriguez walked me to the elevator as the day's negotiations concluded, her expression showing genuine respect for what I'd accomplished. Sarah, I have to say, this has been an education in technical leadership and intellectual property protection. What you built into TaskFlow Pro was brilliant from both a technical and business perspective. Thank you, Emma, I replied. I hope StreamlineCore can use this experience to build a culture that properly values technical contributions from all team members, not just from me. The elevator doors opened, revealing Amanda the receptionist waiting to head home after her long day. She smiled warmly when she saw me, her earlier confusion replaced by obvious respect. "Have a good evening, Sarah," she said. "It's great to have you back." As I drove home through Austin's evening traffic, TaskFlow Pro's performance metrics, displayed on my phone, showed perfect functionality across all enterprise clients. Microsoft's productivity improvements were back to 40%. Amazon's logistics workflows were optimizing correctly. Tesla's manufacturing systems were running at peak efficiency. But more importantly, the platform's continued success was now properly attributed to my ongoing technical leadership, with legal protections ensuring that my contributions couldn't again be dismissed or appropriated without consequences. The next morning, I woke up in my East Austin loft apartment to find my phone buzzing with congratulatory messages from colleagues throughout the tech industry. News of my dramatic return to StreamlineCore and the circumstances surrounding it had spread quickly through Austin's interconnected professional community. Jennifer Walsh from Innovate Tech Solutions sent a particularly thoughtful message. "Heard about your situation at StreamlineCore. Brilliant technical solution to a business problem. If you ever want to discuss opportunities where technical expertise is properly valued from day one, let's talk." Rachel Green texted me a photo from the StreamlineCore office showing Marcus Thompson in a meeting with junior developers, apparently trying to learn basic software architecture concepts he should have understood before claiming technical leadership. The image was both amusing and encouraging, suggesting that the company might finally be taking technical competence seriously. But the most satisfying message came from an unexpected source. David Chen had sent a brief email acknowledging that StreamlineCore's success had always depended on properly recognizing and supporting technical talent, and that the company was committed to ensuring that all contributors received appropriate credit for their innovations going forward. It was a small step toward the cultural change that StreamlineCore needed, but it represented genuine progress from a leadership team that had learned expensive lessons about the consequences of undervaluing essential contributors. As I prepared for my first day back at StreamlineCore as their formally recognized technical leader, I reflected on the broader implications of what had happened. The tech industry was full of brilliant developers whose contributions were systematically undervalued, appropriated, or dismissed by executives who didn't understand the complexity of what they'd built. My experience demonstrated that protecting your work required more than hoping for fair treatment. It required building protections into the work itself, ensuring that your value couldn't be ignored when it became inconvenient to acknowledge. TaskFlow Pro continued generating $200 million in annual revenue, but now that success was properly attributed to the person who'd created it. The platform's authentication protocols ensured that my contributions would never again be taken for granted or dismissed without consequences. Most importantly, StreamlineCore was beginning to develop a culture where technical expertise was genuinely valued and recognized, rather than appropriated by executives who'd contributed nothing to the innovations they claimed credit for. Transformation wasn't complete, and building sustainable change would require ongoing effort from everyone involved. But the foundation had been established for a company where merit determined recognition, where contributions were properly attributed, and where essential talent was treated with the respect it deserved. Walking back into StreamlineCore's lobby that morning, I felt the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served not through revenge or destruction, but through demonstrating value that couldn't be ignored, appropriated, or dismissed. The future was full of possibilities, and for the first time in years, I was in control of my own destiny. Up next, You've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.